The third episode of Cabinet of Curiosities was a really interesting watch. It had a relatively long runtime compared to the first two, which meant that this one came in just short of an hour, but it certainly needed it, with it being one of the more confusing watches and containing a being that was quite literally out of this world. I thought I'd recap, break down, and explain all that there was to take away from this episode of the anthology. So let's get into it. Here is Cabinet of Curiosities Episode 3, The Autopsy, Ending Explained. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers. The episode started with the event that occurred which ultimately led to the reason for the doctor to be carrying out the autopsy on the 9 bodies following the explosion that occurred underground. Whilst this story on its surface level was about an alien race coming down to Earth, sucking the blood of humans in order to feed and using one specific body as a host, I feel there was a deeper meaning to it. The use of spiders, the doctor's illness, and his mindset was something that I think tied into that. This episode was focused around Dr. Carl Winters carrying out an autopsy on the bodies for a friend who was a sheriff named Nate, who saw some strange occurrences happening with missing individuals, standalone cases, and the explosion that occurred underground. And that was that their bodies were being drained of blood. It was centered around somebody named Eddie Sykes who disappeared one night after going to look at the stars and returned with a sphere, and was claiming to be somebody called Joe Allen. Joe Allen was the individual who ran into the cave with the sphere, leading it to blow up down below, and ultimately killing all of the men. He was evading the police as they were suspecting him to be the person who was killing the people that were going missing. It turned out that he was, well, the alien species that had taken over his body and left his mind dormant on the inside, allowing him to witness all that was going on. Using Eddie as a host, he was feeding off of the people in order to be able to stay alive. These alien creatures contained no senses in their true form. They couldn't see, smell, hear, or anything like that. They relied solely on their human host in order to live, which is something that we saw tie into the ending when it was plunged into darkness. Spiders were a common thing that we were witnessing within this episode, occurring at the start and then all the way through to the end of the episode where it was feasting upon its food. There was a focus on Dr. Carl Winters looking up at the spiders on several occasions, and I thought its inclusion was there for a couple of different reasons. I think one of the reasons was because in Christianity, the spider is a symbol of death. Dr. Winters had death lurking around the corner in more ways than one. We heard that he was terminally ill and only had 6 months left to live, and he also ended up on the table dead following the alien creature trying to take over his body as a host, which is why he was most likely closely linked to the spiders on screen. I also feel as though the spider and its web symbolize the alien creature feeding off of Dr. Winters at the end of the episode, mirroring what we saw when the spider was consuming the fly, so there are a couple of different meanings to it. There was also a couple of other different moments of symbolism in the episode. For example, when they walked into Eddie Sykes' room and the cartoon was playing on screen, when they were consuming their food right up to the bone, I feel it shone a light on the draining of the blood of the individuals that Eddie was going around and feeding off of, something we didn't know at the time when we saw this scene unfold. During the autopsies, Carl would record his findings and we saw him growing more and more suspicious of what could have caused the explosion to have occurred, and if it was even deliberate. As the autopsies went on and the suspicions grew stronger, we saw that there was no blood in many of the people that were lying in front of him. There was a moment where we saw the hairs stand up on the back of his neck and his reflection said, "Run. Get out now." I don't think this was anything paranormal that was occurring. I just think we were seeing the piece of fear, doubt, and flight mode that the subconscious part of his mind was telling him. However, we witnessed that it was something that he certainly should have done. We saw Joe Allen, who was on the table lying there, come to life and start crawling towards Carl, saying, "Help me." This was one of the only times that we saw the real Eddie coming out. We heard that there was an alien creature that was inside of him that had been using him as a host and that he now planned on using Carl as a host moving forward. We then saw Carl awaken on a table where we saw the creature feeding off of all of the individuals that were lying there. The traveler that had been carrying out these acts for millennia was at a stage where it needed to cut itself out of its host and cause an incision in Carl in order to be able to take over his body. We heard that it had no senses at all, so outside of the host it was rendered blind and needed to feel its way to the opening. The remaining part of Eddie that was there left the scalpel at a point where Carl would be able to grab a hold of it, and at that point we saw a tear go down the side of his face as it was his last act that he did, and the only time in recent times where he was himself and fully in control. Carl found himself not knowing what to do, but in the end we saw him start to use the knife and weaken himself. He rendered his own senses redundant so that once the creature took over his body, it would be surprised to see that it wasn't in the condition that it thought it would be in. He was also slowly dying, meaning that the creature had taken over a body that it was going to die in. It was the only way for it to be stopped and destroyed. I viewed this creature almost like the illness that Carl had. It inhabited its body without permission and planned on taking over to the point where he wasn't himself anymore. But this was Carl being able to take control. As this happened, we saw that Carl left the recording device on as all of this was occurring, and as Nate walked in the next morning, upon his body the words "play tape, burn me" were on him in blood. This was so that Nate would be able to know what was going on in the town and that the case would be solved, and then the burning of him would mean that the alien creature would be destroyed and not be able to use anybody else as a host. I really enjoyed this episode. It was a lot more thought-provoking than the previous two, and the small cast definitely carried the story well. The symbolism of the spiders, the thought-provoking question of are we alone in the universe, and the tragic end for Carl Winters was sad to witness, but it provided a lot to think about. The delivery of Dr. Carl Winters was extremely well done. You felt the experience of somebody who carried out autopsies and the intelligence and intrigue that was there as he was slowly cracking the case. The episode had me guessing throughout the duration of the runtime, and I was constantly guessing what was going to be happening next. The episode was tonally dark, and the wooden, oaky grade to it really complemented the mood and feeling of what we were watching. The score in the background wasn't something that stood out to me, unlike the first two episodes where I feel it was really able to shine. I would recommend giving this episode a watch. I wouldn't say that I preferred it to the first two episodes in the anthology, but it's definitely worth a watch and still a great piece of television. I'm going to be covering all of the episodes in this anthology, so feel free to go over to my channel and see my videos on the first two episodes, or stick around for the upcoming episodes too. So, there you have it. Cabinet of Curiosities Episode 3 The Autopsy, Ending Explained. If you want to see more videos such as Endings Explained, Theories and Predictions, and Character Breakdowns, then click on the I button, or alternatively you can head over to my channel where you'll find them all. If you'd like to give me a show or movie that you'd like me to review, then head over to my Twitter, @brainpilot_, and tweet me what show or movie you'd like me to review next. And finally, if you'd like to see what I rate the latest movies that don't quite make the cut to getting a dedicated video, then head over to my Letterboxd profile. It's where I rate the latest releases in real time. What did you think of this episode? Leave a comment down below, and don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you next time.